So moved.
Motion made by Ms. Reynolds. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gomez. Any discussion? Mr. Izzy?
Aye.
Mr. Gomez?
Aye.
Mr. Russolino?
I wasn't here for that meeting, but so I recuse on that
Okay.
vote.
Ms. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon?
Aye.
Ms. Reynolds?
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye. And before I get to subcommittee report, I neglected to do it, and then when I looked over at Mr. Russolino, it reminded me. We do have a new council member, and we want to, on behalf of the council, welcome you, Joseph Russolino, to the council, and we look forward to working with you. So welcome. And next would be subcommittee reports, staff reports.
Mr. Chair, the Rights of Way Subcommittee just met prior to this meeting tonight to talk about intervenor status and scheduling matters for the Spring Avenue and Westerly right-of-way matter. So there's a lot of information being exchanged on that matter that the subcommittee is dealing with, but procedurally, a lot of things were taken care of at this last subcommittee, and scheduling on actual hearing dates moving forward in the town of Westerly will be forthcoming, if not in July in the August meeting for sure.
Thank you. A staff reports.
I don't have any staff reports other than welcoming Mr. Russolino myself, and also that we have a second new council member, Kevin Flynn, who is formerly the town city planner for city of Cranston before he moved on to the state and was the state planning director for many years. Mr. Flynn had a long-standing conflict with tonight's meeting, but he will be here for all meetings going forward. And I just want to put on the record that while Mr. Russolino and Mr. Flynn had to be, of course, nominated and then Senate confirmed prior to coming, they also needed to have training by CRMC staff, by me, the executive director, and both participated in that last week. So both are able to sit on the council and make decisions.
Thank you. First matter will be the ratification of Revolution Wind's proposal to have BSC Group Incorporated service the third-party environmental compliance monitor / third-party inspector for onshore construction.
Mr. Chair, I'll introduce that before I turn it over to staff, Justin Skenyon, our principal ocean engineer on that matter. But this matter is in front of the council as a ratification of the choice of Ørsted's Revolution Wind project to engage an environmental monitor as required by the Category B application that this council approved back in December of 2022. Justin?
Thank you, Jeff. So the council, back in when we ratified the application for the Revolution project, there was an environmental compliance monitor in effect. That was for the entirety of the project in theory, but right now we'll break this generic we'll break it up. So the on-land portion, including the substation and the transmission facility, is covered by the proposed also by the applicant, which was BSC's corporation. I reviewed that, but they seemed very credible and will match our requirements for such a request.
So staff, Mr. Chair, is have no issues with this project and hiring that on those duties as required by this.
Okay. Looks like Attorney Mayne speaking on it, right? Is that
Yes.
Yeah. You?
Good evening, everyone. Robin Main for Revolution Wind. And with me tonight, I have John Case from the Eversource portion of the JV that makes up the joint venture that makes up Revolution Wind with Ørsted. And I also have Allison Middleman from BSC Group, who we have nominated as the environmental compliance monitor. If we may, this is a requirement, as Mr. Skenyon just said, under stipulation M to the category BSN that was included last year. In a very short period of time, what I'd like to do here is to have Mr. Case present what the plan is for the environmental compliance monitor interacting with CRMC. And then Ms. Middleman can give her background and credentials to the council.
Okay.
So, John, please.
Good evening.
You just swear in.
My name is John Case. I am the director at Eversource Energy.
Is this gonna be testimony?
It's a ratification, so it's not an
Maybe in case we
official.
ask them a question.
Yeah, I think it's better if we swear you in.
Okay.
Please raise your right hands. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Okay, please state your names and spell them for the record. Thank you.
My name is John Case, JOHNCASE.
My name is Allison, ALISON, Norman, MILLIMA.
Thank you. Please proceed.
So again, my name is John Case, director at Eversource Energy. I have been with Eversource for about 33 years now as various capacities in their transition organization, from engineering to project management, construction management. And most recently, the last 4 years, as director of offshore wind siting and permitting on the Redwood Wind project. My responsibilities in that capacity include the securing all necessary permits that are applicable to support the onshore construction aspects, including the CRMC consent for Revolution. And the scope of my purview is the landfall work area, the interconnection facility, the onshore substation facility, and the transmission cable that runs the landfall work area to the substation. My responsibilities will extend into construction as responsible for the compliance with all applicable permits and conditions that have been assigned to the project through the various permit. That includes the development of a project team and a project implementation plan, which has been provided to you for your review. On my internal team, that includes a compliance manager, as well as our own in-field staff that will be on site during construction activities anytime construction is going on. We've supplemented our internal resources with compliance manager from VHP, as well as VHP's field inspectors. So they are responsible for the day-to-day compliance of the project and overseeing our contractors directly. The responsibilities also include oversight with the compliance management plan and what reporting structure we have for any findings that are observed out in the field, and escalation and communication among the project team and their roles and responsibilities. And unless there are any specific questions on that, I'd like to introduce VSC Group, and specifically Allison. VSC brings a wealth of experience with Rhode Island permitting in linear as well as secure projects. They have been working in this capacity for various other agencies. And I will turn it over to Allison.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Miller. I'm a senior associate and environmental scientist at BSC Group Incorporated. I've been in the environmental consulting business for over 15 years of experience working with clients. As background, I have a bachelor's of science in wildlife and connectivity biology, a master's of science in environmental science. Both of my degrees are from the University of Rhode Island. I also am a certified professional in erosion and sediment control. At BSC, I'm currently working on several projects in Rhode Island, specifically the V148S project, which is somewhat analogous to this role for Revolution Wind. As the project manager, I oversee all aspects of the environmental permitting, including DEM, freshwater wetlands, and the RIPD's certifications, including monthly reporting on this project to our DEM reviewer. And we're documenting our environmental compliance, and I oversee that aspect of the project as well. You should know that I also currently have several projects involving CRMC applications and regulations. I'd like to note that BSC has several staff local and near the project site who are available and reporting to me. We take pride in the fact that we have trained and experienced staff, including certified stormwater inspectors, and all of our compliance staff are EPA certified for the training program. So I look forward to working with CRMC staff on the Revolution Wind project. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Case or Ms. Milliman from the council?
Just,
Mr. Gomez?
probably it's more for Robin, but, I went through the brochure and the material you supplied, and I thought it was a really good job. The question that I have is, and we just described onshore, basically, the terminations and all of that. I'm just kind of curious as to what happens, underwater cable, the oversight on that, and working our way out to the actual, is there something similar going on there or not? I mean, this part of it, I had no problems with. It was fine. The work you guys have done looked interesting. But at any rate, so that was just stuck in my head. Are we leaving something out was the only thing.
So I'll address that,
Yeah.
please, and thank you for that question, because the offshore component will be handled in two key ways. Number one, there will be an environmental compliance monitor for the offshore work, and we'll propose that person late summer, early fall of this year.
Okay.
In addition, under the ascent, the category B ascent from late fall of last year, the council has already approved our certification verification agent, and that is DNV Group. So they will also be involved. So there's two here that will in particular be available for reporting, and that environmental
And
compliance
that
monitor.
covers the whole project.
Exactly.
And where does the federal come in? I mean, you guys, this is subject to the CRMC and state. How does the federal link up with this? Or doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does, because that CBA is also part of the project for the entire scope of it.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Anything else, Robin?
No, thank you.
Okay. So we have before us the ratification of Revolution Wind's proposal to have BSC. We do need to take a vote to ratify their selection. So with that said, is there a motion from the council? Mr. Gomez?
I'll move ratification based on the documents that we received and have reviewed and explanations provided by the applicant. And I guess there's findings in fact in there. I don't know, but if there are, that's included.
All right, a motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Izzy. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll poll the council on the vote. Mr. Izzy?
Aye.
Mr. Gomez?
Aye.
Mr. Russolino? Ms. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon? Ms. Reynolds?
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coy, vote aye.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Now brings us to our applications that have been out to public notice before the council for review and action. First matter is 2023-03-092 Interstate Navigation Company. It's an application to install a new 8-pile timber dolphin 33 feet seaward of the existing fixed pier located between the 2 ferry berths and 3 feet landward of the boundary of the federal project. Parentheses, the 15-foot channel, basin and anchorage that lies within the confines of Old Harbor, close parentheses, located at Plat 6, Lot 150 at 150 Water Street, New Shoreham, Rhode Island. Is the applicant present on that particular matter? Not coming. We know they weren't coming.
I I don't know why they're not here. The engineer knew about it also. I made sure I emailed him this morning.
All right, well, kick that to the bottom of the agenda for now in case they're running a little bit late. Other parties here on the Richard Rua application. All right, come forward, sir. That's 2022-0-2 Richard Rua. It's an application to construct and maintain a residential boating facility totaling 91.85 feet in length, consisting of a fixed pier to a ramp and float exceeding 75 feet beyond mean low water and falling within 25 feet of the property line extension to the north. The facility requires a variance from the Red Book, parentheses 650 RICR -200-0-1, close parentheses, section 1.3.1 D 11 L. That's located at plat 15, lot 44, 315 Riverside Street, Portsmouth, Rhode Island. And just before I get to that, I just want to jump back is there anyone else present in the audience on the Interstate Navigation Company application in favor or in opposition? Okay, thank you. Are you Mr. Rua?
I am.
All right. Do we want to swear him in first or just
That's fine. Sir, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. And I know for staff, Amy Silva has this one.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Um,
You can be seated if you want, sir. Sure. Okay.
This application is for a residential boating facility on type 2 waters located in Bluebell Cove in Portsmouth. It does have a variance to extend to 75 feet mean low water, where they're going to have approximately 2 feet of water depth. The dock is situated less than 25 feet to the roughly northern property abutter. It's essentially touching that property line and exceeds the 25-foot property line setback to the roughly southern abutter. The non-affected butter has submitted multiple objections. And the summary of their objection concerns are, at one point, they were told that no dock could be built on this property. An assertion that the applicant does not have a boat. A concern that the dock will affect this neighbor's view and that the dock will adversely affect recreational uses. The first two concerns are not regulatory Red Book concerns that the CRMC addresses within our review process. The view shed effect is within the Red Book regulations and docks that are in type 2 waters that are designed to meet the CRMC Red Book standards are not typically considered an adverse view impact. We approve docks all the time. Similar for the concerns about affecting recreational uses. This is type 2 waters. A dock is an accepted recreational use in type 2 waters. This application meets the criteria to be approved administratively if it had not received a meeting. The dock meets the design standards and requests the variance to get to a better water depth. The applicant chose to terminate at 75 feet beyond mean low water, which is 2 feet of water depth, presumably to avoid a longer variance, which would require council approval, as 3 foot is considered our typical water depth of a dock. However, that would have sent it to the council for a water depth or an additional length variance. There are no staff objections to this application. Staff feels that the concerns of the objector are met within the standards of the Red Book. We do defer to the council on the matter of the objection, and should the council approve this application, standard stipulations will be prepared.
Thank you. Before I hear from Mr. Rua, I'm just going to ask, is there anyone else present this evening to speak in favor of this application? Anyone to speak in opposition of the application? Okay. No one's here either way except yourself, sir. So please give us a short synopsis, presentation, or anything that you may want to say.
Okay, I was prepared as the letter that was submitted by the butter neighbor. Just had a bunch of bullet points that were all addressed in the follow-up, as you know, she had just mentioned. So no, I mean, it's nothing different. I mean, I'm not trying to make anything different than the neighbors already have. It's a simple dock.
Any questions of Mr. Gomez?
Yeah, I'm just having we've done very similar in the same area, but I'm just trying to really get a fix on their location. Is that Bluebill Cove?
Right.
Is it on the inside on that, the south side of Bluebill, or is it
If you're looking straight across the cove, you're looking at the highway,
right,
the way station,
right? Okay, so you're on the south side.
facing the Mount Hope Bridge, I guess you could say. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's.
Well, yeah, it is. I see a curve here, and I'm not quite sure where that is, but we certainly had problems previously with lines crossing on docks. People think that they have riparian rights, so what I see here doesn't seem to have as much a problem as getting in the neighbors and problems with the butters and stuff. And we've argued the same case before, trying to find water so that you can have a boat if you want of some sort. So I just curious as to exactly where it was. It is in the cove and it's on the south side, and that's all I need. Thank you. I'm familiar with that.
Ms. Silva, I know you raised your hand. Did you want to
Yeah,
add
just
something to the
just to
answer?
clarify for Mr. Gomez, there is a small and rather challenging to read locus map in the application package.
I've got that. It is small.
It is, yes. This is an area where the lot lines are pretty perpendicular to the shore in this place, so they do extend rather straight out. We've
Mhm.
certainly had situations where they come out at angles.
Yeah.
I did forget to state in my introduction, the affected neighbor has submitted 2 letters of support for the project. They understand that this dock is essentially on their property line. One of the letters
I see.
intimated that they may even share it at some point, so they do support the dock being
Okay.
on their line.
Thank you. Any other questions, Ms. Hall?
I have a question for the staff, for Amy, on your conclusions regarding the objection. Is it your conclusion that the objection is not substantive?
That's not a conclusion that staff typically makes. That's why we ultimately defer to counsel for it. But I feel as though, the 4 summarized objections, 2 of them aren't particularly red book concerns. And 2 of them I feel like have been addressed appropriately. Staff does support the variance.
So you're saying that the staff doesn't make a determination under the red book as to whether an objection is substantive?
Typically not, no. We do address the concerns, but we don't go that far.
Right, so I guess I have a question for legal counsel. Is this the appropriate time to ask that?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm curious about this particular, the status of this particular application relative to the recent appointment of a hearing officer. And I'm wondering if this, because there has been an objection, I believe we would have to make a determination as to whether or not the objection is or isn't substantive. Because that is the key to whether under our rules, the matter is considered contested. One of the keys, one is that there's been a request for a hearing or there's been a substantive objection. So I guess my question for legal counsel is, is the council now bound to make that determination that this objection is or isn't substantive under 1.1.6 D?
Thing. Well,
Legal counsel question.
yeah,
I'm just asking.
The objectors are not here, that I would believe play into that. They're not here to object.
Well, actually, I hate to do this, but I have a question to Jeff first. And that is, I read that a hearing officer was appointed and confirmed. Has the hearing officer been sworn in? And is the hearing officer now an employee of the state of Rhode Island? And I only ask that because, I know that the hearing officer that was appointed is a practicing attorney. And I'm just wondering if he's on board yet, because the statute does say that it doesn't apply to applications that come before the hearing officer is fully appointed. I just have a question. Then I want to address what a substantive objection is.
Well, I know what it is. I guess the question is who decides. Yeah, thank you.
So I've had communication with the new hearing officer, but we have not actually connected. So we're just exchanging information, and those are the questions that I need to ask. I do not know if the hearing officer has been sworn, but the hearing officer has not been brought onto the employment system yet.
Okay, so, and I'm just gonna go over what constitutes a substantive objection and what the standards are. And then I'd like to address who makes that call. And under the reg, a substantive objection is defined as one or more of the following: threat of direct loss of property of the objectors at the site in question. 2, direct evidence that the proposed alteration or activity does not meet all the policies, prerequisites, and standards contained in applicable sections of this document. 3, evidence is presented which demonstrates that the proposed activity or alteration has a potential to significant adverse impacts on one or more of the following descriptors of the coastal environment: circulation and or flushing patterns, sediment deposition and erosion, biological communities including vegetation, shellfish, finfish resources, and wildlife habitat, areas of historic and archaeological significance, scenic and or recreation values, water quality, public access to and along the shore, shoreline erosion and flood hazards, or evidence that the proposed activity or alterations does not conform to state or duly adopted municipal development plans, ordinances, or regulations. Now, I agree with the analysis that Amy just gave, that's not something that staff makes the determination on. I do think it's something that would have to be determined by the council as to whether or not an objection is substantive to the point where it should be referred out. And, cases can be, I shouldn't call them cases. It's just, it's the lawyer thing, but applications can also be referred out if 4 council members make that determination too. And I think that that goes to the argument on this. Difficult, I think, for the staff to make that determination in the first instance, although based upon what they do in their staff reports, they certainly can discuss the factors, as was done in this staff report, as to whether or not the objections are valid or supported by evidence, which is, I think, what Amy did. One of the things that she said here was that they defer to the council on matters of this nature, which I think has been past practice, but I think it's the correct practice.
So is the answer to the question, the council has to decide on an application if an objection is substantive? We have to make that finding.
That'd be correct, yes.
Okay, so would we need a separate vote for that before proceeding on an application? We would if there's a hearing officer appointed.
Well, I think that that's an issue that should come up beforehand to see whether or not it needs to be referred out to the hearing officer. So yes, I don't see any other way that can happen. And I think it has to be on the motion of a council member to say, look, based on the staff's report and what staff had to say, substantive objection, I move as such that it be determined on that these are the facts and the evidence I'm relying on, so that it should be referred.
And that would just be for applications? Because you're not going to make a substantive, we're not going to make a similar finding for referral out for enforcement matters, right? Or appealing a fine, because there's no.
Enforcement matters are separate. That would go to the hearing officer in the first instance. I think that's the statutory basis for that.
Yeah, so in this case, it's whether or not there's a substantive objection or a request for hearing by an objector. It's and or in our rules.
Can I comment on that?
You most certainly can. Please do.
The way the definition is for a contested case, it's before the council shall be considered contested when a substantive formal written objection and or request for hearing. So the request for hearing just can't be a simple request. It has to be a substantive formal request for hearing.
Well, it doesn't say that. It says a substantive written objection and or request for hearing.
Well, so in my 30+ years, this has always been construed with the intent that substantive has to be met by definition that I think Attorney DeSisto laid out. I think you meant it was 116, I believe.
So are you saying substantive
Still has that's required
defines
to be met.
request for hearing?
Which one is it?
I'm not- It's
So
substantive.
it's not, so an objection that says I want a hearing by in and of itself isn't substantive.
It's- That's not what this says.
May I just?
I understand construction issues. I don't want to go into English grammar, but again, from day one, it's always had to be a substantive bar that's raised to make the determination if it's a contested case.
This may be something we may want to look at.
Well,
The new hearing officer appointed, since this is going to be really critical.
yes, and I just to add to the mix, and then I'm going to give some advice afterwards, because I actually don't think it affects this application, and I'm sorry that we would take the time, but it's here under section 1.5.1 F of the management procedures. And I'm sorry, I'll read it into the record. In the event that during this 30-day period, formal written objection and or request for hearing is received by the Coastal Resources Management Council from an interested party, and said formal written objection and or request for hearing is substantiated by genuine and material reason as outlined in section 20-00-1.1.6G of this title, therefore, the matter shall then become a contested case under the rules and regulations of the council, whereupon a public hearing may be scheduled at a time immediately following the 30-day objection period. Now, I only bring that up because there is a reference to, the management procedures. So I think that once the hearing officer is on and is employed and sworn in, one of the things that needs to be done in the first instance is some rules and regulations have to be in place for that to clarify some of these issues. Now, because I wasn't the drafter, I get to say this. Sometimes this isn't as clear as it should be. And you know what? Clarity is important. We can kind of, Jeff, I'm not saying that you did a bad job, but these things can be sharpened up, because you know what? I think that with this hearing officer, with the funding that's come along with the hearing officer, you really need to have that done so these issues can streamline the process and make it easier for the applicants.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions of Mr. Rua on his application?
No questions of Mr. Rua. I just have a follow-up question of our legal counsel. Do you know the status of Mr. Krieger? Has he been sworn in or?
I don't, that's why I'm asking the question. I read the article that, he'd been not only appointed, but his appointment ratified.
Confirmed by the Senate.
But I was just questioning what the status was, I have to say this for the lawyers that are here. I know he's not a judge, but I analogize it to it. It's a practice.
Yeah.
And I have to be sworn in. I'm assuming he has to wind up the practice.
without talking out of school, I think he was in the process of winding up his practice before he was appointed.
Okay.
to this. So
I don't know myself, so I can't address it, and I'm hoping somebody can tell me.
I can tell you. And I did.
All right, so,
So what is it?
so regardless of, well, I don't want to say regardless, but whether or not he's sworn in place or whatever, that'll only come into effect if we make a determination that there's a substantive objection and that we think that this matter should go in front of a hearing officer as a contested matter. So if this council is of an opinion that this is not substantive objections, then it doesn't go any further, then it stays with us. Am I correct?
That's correct, yes, and there's going to be applications coming forward, I think, when the hearing officer is fully on board. Whereas the application comes in and there's objections, that's something that's a preliminary determination. There's evidence there, you can say, look, there's a substantive objection. So it's not at the stage that Mr. Rua is, this is the end for him. It's more the matter of going forward. I think the council is going to be called upon to say, look, this is a contested matter. There's a lot of evidence out here. We should refer this to the hearing officer now, so that the hearing officer can do the statutory duties, make those findings of fact and conclusions of law and a recommendation before it comes back here. I think that's the process that's outlined on contested cases. Now, if it's an administrative fine hearing or violation, by its very nature, that's contested. Somebody's been hit with an NOV and they want to contest that. So that just goes to the hearing officer in the first instance for enforcement matters.
Yeah.
That's all.
For the sake of this application.
Yeah.
Is the fact that we should take administrative notice of that there is currently no serving hearing officer that's been adequately sworn in, that's in place. I think for the record, we should be very clear before we proceed. Is that what we're being advised of?
Why I don't know that. I can't say that I know for a fact what the status of the hearing officer is, and given that, I think what you can do is first take notice of that. That's the first thing.
Take notice of the fact that we don't know.
That it's unclear. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, and I'm sure Mr. Rua doesn't want to hear this, but I think one of the things that you should do on this circumstance is based upon what you've heard from Ms. Silva, and based on the comment that we have from Mr. Gomez that the objectors are not here, and you've seen the objections as to whether or not this constitutes a substantive objection. And that's a belt and suspenders approach that I think is a good idea.
I have a question, further question. It doesn't require them to be here. It only requires it that be written. Is that a correct interpretation of the rules? I just want to be clear.
They're not required to be here, yes, but I think that
So I don't know if that's material to determine.
well, hold on. I understand that that's your position,
No, I'm asking the
but
question.
hold on. But Mr. Gomez, he has a different opinion. That's not something that, to me, legally, I can give you advice on. I think that comes to your discretion. So you've heard from two members, one of them said, look, they don't have to show up. I'm not going to consider it. And another one saying, where are they? If this is a substantive objection, they have to present evidence on this under 1.6, because it says that direct evidence under subsection B, that the proposed alteration, that's direct evidence, does not meet all the policies. Evidence is presented which demonstrates that the proposed activity, and then it goes on from there. So the question is if they're not here and you have a letter that makes conclusory statements, is that something that can be relied upon as a substantive objection? I can't speak for the council on that? Because I think it's something that you need to determine on your own, but I think that's where Mr. Gomez is coming from. I don't want to put words in his mouth.
I got
Oh, I just
yeah, just from where I'm coming, I'm looking at past practice. And past practice, part of the objective not being here is our past practice. Past practice is we've seen similar applications approved by this council in this physical area, geographical area. You gave us a list of what we should consider as substantive areas. There were, grass. There was, you listed a number of areas, none of which apply to this application, in my opinion. So I think it's done a good job. They've have decided that the objectives, some of the objectives were not applicable. The others were, the applicant has met the variance criteria for the location of this, and that the objectives conclusions or the objections from the objector have been reviewed and concluded that they're not substantive, basically, in a staff report.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a suggestion? And my suggestion is this: since we don't know whether we have a hearing officer who's been confirmed and sworn in, perhaps out of an abundance of caution, we take a vote as to whether the objection from the sole objector to this application has presented a substantive objection. If the board votes no, then that's the end of it. If the board votes yes, then maybe we make a referral to the hearing officer conditional on knowing whether or not he's been sworn in. If he hasn't been sworn in, then what we've done is void ab initio, because there is no hearing officer to assign it to. If he has been sworn in, then it will go to him. But I think that might cover all of our bases, and we can.
I agree. That's
with the
kind
applicant.
of what I said. I mean, do we make the preliminary determination or vote whether or not it's a substantive objection? And then depending on that, depends on what else happens this evening. Do you agree?
I do now. It's opposite of what I just said, but now I'm listening to you too, and I have to say logically, it goes. I think that's the way to go.
I mean, am I correct that if, as Ms. Izzy said, if the council votes that they're not substantive objections and therefore don't rise to a level of conflict that necessitates a referral to the hearing officer, then it's properly before us for vote this evening? Am I
Yeah.
correct with that?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Anyone, let's address the first one.
I would move that the council determine, based on the presentation by the applicant and by council staff, and an understanding of the objection that's been presented, and after a review of the standards to consider the objection substantive, that the council find that the objection is not substantive and proceed to a vote on the application.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Ms. Izzy, seconded by Mr. Gomez. Any discussion? Ms. Hall?
So first, regarding past practices, I think that, as with all due respect, we're in a different territory now relative to what the council has handled in the past, with the appointment of the hearing officer pursuant to statute. So I think we just have to remember that we're not necessarily, we're in new territory. And so past practices may or may not be applicable. Secondly, with respect to the objection, being substantive or not relative to whether it's written or whether the objector is present, our rule 1.5.1F specifically refers to written objection to be considered by the council. There's zero reference to that person required to be here. I think it would be an undue burden to the public to require them to be present simply to call something substantive. That's not in the rules, it's not required, and that I believe should not be considered at all.
I don't think that was part of, I don't think that was part of the motion.
It's part of my discussion. And it is part of the motion relative to comments that were made regarding whether this was substantive or not, both by legal counsel and by a member of the council. So in my discussion on this, I'm responding to those comments that in the direction given to us by legal counsel. And then my third point, I guess, under substantive objection is that one of the definitions read by legal counsel, which is in our rules, speaks about evidence presented which demonstrates the proposed activity has potential for significant adverse impacts and a number of factors, and one is public access. And the conclusion here by staff was that the objection was relative to access for recreation. In addition to some of the other ones relative to view, and that there had been no demonstration of significant recreational use, but that isn't one of the standards under significant objection or substantive objection, but it be significant recreational use, just that there be a potential for adverse impact to recreation values and public access. That's all I have to say about that. That's all for my discussion relative to your motion.
The location that we are talking about, and in previous cases, the recreational impact is minimal. There's not a lot of people on that side of the cove that are using it, driving there. It's mainly residents around the cove with their own docks, with their own frontage that are using it. It's not a place where the public goes for recreation. It's not a place for surfboards or sailboats or any of that, other than kind of locally owned by the abutters. And the idea of not considering past practice, I think is a slippery slope, because I think it opens up people that were impacted by this on previous decisions to come forward again and say you were incorrect in assuming that my objections were not substantive. So that the whole issue, I think we ought to take a vote that puts it on the record. What we think at this time, I think that we've had quite a bit of discussion there. I still go back to those categories that Mr. DeSisto listed, and I agree with all of those categories, and I don't see any coming to play in this particular instance. And if one of those came to play, then I'd be on the other side. I would say, gee, there's a real problem here. But the list that you had is pretty, it's a good detailed list. We don't fall into any of those categories, in my opinion.
I do want to correct one thing. I'm always worried about appeals. And my comments about not appearing were just to reference what one of the other members said. I don't want it the record to indicate that I said if someone doesn't show up, then that is a probative in and of itself. I was referencing what another member said. I just want to make that clear in case there's an appeal.
Thank you. One follow-up question for staff relative to what Councilmember Gomez was stating about all this background information about this area and about recreation. I didn't see a lot of background information in the record about surfing and canoeing and all this. I guess I just don't know what is the relative recreational use of this area.
It is not a well-known recreational area. It's a pretty quiet area, like Mr. Gomez says.
Is that in this report?
It's in only in those few short sentences where I stated that it's not an area known to have significant recreational use. And as I pointed out in the summary, a dock in type 2 water is an accepted recreational use, as well as other recreational uses. But it's not an area that's known as a local hotspot per se.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, Ms. Izzy,
I just want to check. Was there a second?
Mr.
I
Gomez.
second that.
You did. Okay.
And the motion is that if we vote aye, that indicates that we feel the issue is not substantive.
Correct. Ms. Izzy,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez,
Aye.
Mr. Russolino.
Aye.
Ms. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon.
Aye.
Ms. Reynolds.
Aye.
I too vote aye. So it's been voted in the affirmative unanimously that the objections based on all of our discussion on the record are not substantive. Which I'm asking council out loud, does it now allow us the opportunity to vote on this application?
Correct, yes.
All right. Is there a motion from the council on the application?
Mr. Chairman, on the application for a variance or request for a variance with regard to this application, I would move that the council approve the request for a variance based on the application, the applicant's testimony here tonight, the staff's report, and the staff's presentation of the staff report. And I would ask that the council find that the applicant has met the requirements for a variance.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Izzy, seconded by Mr. Gomez. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll poll the council. Mr. Izzy.
Aye.
Mr. Gomez.
Aye.
Mr. Russolino.
Aye.
Ms. Hall.
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon.
Aye.
Ms. Reynolds.
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye. So the application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just so they have the whole application. This is just a variance. No?
If there's a special use, there was. The variance is the application. The variation. Yeah. But when there was a special use, it's, we needed to.
Yes. Yes.
We don't need two votes.
I can't hear you. What, are you getting legal advice?
It's just a clarification. No,
No,
we're all set.
No legal advice. The question is whether or not this was the only relief requested on the application. And I believe it is.
The variance?
Yes.
Correct, and it was a variance that did not require, it could have been done administratively, but for the.
Yes,
Okay.
that was the question.
All right.
Thank you.
next matter, James and Kathleen Phillip. This is 2022-12-053. It's an application to construct and maintain a new residential boating facility consisting of a 4-foot by 70-foot fixed timber pier, 3 feet by 20 feet aluminum gangway, and a 6-foot by 21-foot terminal float, which equates to 126 square feet. The facility will extend 75-foot seaward of the cited mean low water mark, requiring a 25-foot length variance to Red Book 650-RICR-20-00-01, section 1.3.1 D11L, located at plat 82-4, lot 81 at 117D Sherman Road, South Kingston, Rhode Island. You got this one. Does Amy, you have this one as well?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair and members of the board, would it be helpful? I have brought a big poster board with me at the plan set. Would that be helpful if I use that during your presentation?
It would, and before you get it, why don't you just raise your right hands? Who's ever going to testify? You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your names and spell them for the record.
Kathleen Phillip, CATHLEEN PHILLIP.
James Phillip, JAMESPHILLIP. Joshua Morrow, KOSHUAMORROW.
Your board, is it a depiction of what you've submitted with your application?
It is.
Okay,
I also have small copies if you and the board use that.
Is there anyone else this evening that's going to speak in favor of this application? Anyone present this evening that will be speaking in opposition of this application? One person. Amy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application is also for a dock located in type 2 waters of Point Judith Pond along the southwest shore of Point Judith Pond. The subject lot is situated next to a paper street. The dock as proposed meets all of the Red Book standards except for a length variance to extend to 75 feet beyond mean low water. The length extension is to obtain the minimum water depth of 18 inches. There is no SAV present at the site, and the dock will be elevated to 5 foot to provide lateral access to the shore. At the time of the public notice, the immediate abutters were only noticed. Review staff was then informed that this road is a private road, and staff requested that the applicant provide information on all owners of this road, and a second public notice was provided to all parties. The staff report does note that the submitted plans contain a couple of minor errors, and should the council approve this request, a corrected set of plans will be required prior to issuing the assent, not substitute to the design. They're editorial corrections that need to be made. The subject property does have a history with CRMC working on the dwelling and has a history of complaints regarding blocking of this road, which is often referred to as a right-of-way. Staff has visited the site and confirmed that the site is currently in conformance with all previous CRMC assents, and that during the work on the dwelling, equipment was placed within that roadway and did block it temporarily. During the course of our public notice, a couple objections came in. The summary of the objections are concerns over the traditional, quote, recreational uses that occur out there, particularly being that there is a paper road and people utilize it. Staff points out that docks on type 2 waters are an accepted recreational use. The dock does meet CRMC standards. The other larger concern is the impact to access via this paper street / right-of-way, as it is interchangeably called, as the road has been previously blocked in the past. The dock is not going to affect the shoreline near this road right-of-way. It does meet its side setback requirements. Staff did offer in their report a possible stipulation that could be added to the assent if council wished, stating that construction of this dock be by barge only, and that no access or equipment be placed along the road / right-of-way. If not for the objection, this application would qualify for administrative approval and would have received administrative approval. There are no staff objections to the application. Staff feels that the request for the length variance to meet the minimum 18-inch water depth variance criteria have been met, and feels that the concerns of the objectors are met within the standards of the Red Book, as well as with the potential stipulation that council may choose. Staff defers to the council on the matter of the objection. Should the council approve this application, a corrected set of plans will be required prior to assent issuance, tidy up those editorial errors. Standard dock assents stipulations will be prepared, and a specific assent stipulation regarding construction access by barge only and no use of the road / right of way will be written if the council chooses to require it in their approval. Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Any questions of Amy?
Yeah, just quickly, we're talking 25 feet. Is that what the variance is asking for? 25 feet past the 50?
Correct. They're going out to 75
Yeah,
where they will, where
so
they will
we're
reach
looking
18
at a
inches.
25-foot variance.
Correct.
Thank you.
And similar to the last one, it is a variance that qualifies for administrative approval if there were no objections.
Right, thank you.
And
Mr.
I just need a clarification on. There is an objection based on interference with the recreational use of Point Judith Pond. Is that
Correct.
Okay.
There is an assertion that this dock will interfere with uses of the pond.
was the objection that the dock would interfere with recreational uses, or that during the construction of the dock, the road will be blocked and people can't get to the pond?
A little bit of both.
Okay. All right. Personally, I don't see the issue with the dock, but the issue with the road, I understand. And if the construction is done from the water side, then the road won't be blocked, correct?
Correct. If that requirement is put in, it would have to be done from the water only.
Can we ask the applicant if
You can ask him.
they can?
Yeah.
Does the applicant have any issue with doing all the construction from the water and not blocking the road?
No, so that's how it was planned originally, when I met with the dock builders 2 years ago.
Okay.
It's been going on for a while. The plan is by barge only, there'll be nothing on land. The dock is obviously on our property. The right of way became an issue when we built our home in 2016. I can tell you that we followed every letter to the law. And we had, I know there were complaints about us, but our builders were following this, CRMC as well as town. So, but we will not block the right of way. There'll be nothing on land.
You know where that right of way
I
terminates?
know exactly where it is. I know it.
Does it go to the water?
Yes, it comes. And you might be able to show me that again, yeah. So, excuse me,
It's that, all right. And where's the dock?
here's the proposed dock. The right of way is here along the south side of our, this is our property
Excuse
here.
me,
The dock is here.
excuse me. I can't see on the sand, I'm sorry.
This is our property. The dock in question is here. The right of way is to the south of our property, 10 feet wide, and it extends to the water. And it's a continuation of the road that comes down between the area.
Is it a continuation of Dunphy Road?
That's correct.
Okay. So,
Page 5 in the agenda package. for
Yeah.
this Application.
okay.
How wide is that right of way? The right of way, what's the width? 20 feet? I see 6
Right of way is
foot,
10 feet wide.
10 feet?
Yes.
And I see a 6 foot existing. Eyes are good, 6 foot portion known as Dunphy Road, I guess. Is that correct? What's this existing 6 foot AC water main that I'm looking at on the
That
plan?
must just be a 6-inch lateral for water service,
Existing.
existing currently, yeah.
And what, if I may, what is the termination at the water? What is it, just the shoreline, or is there a termination?
Or the end of
For the right of way, you instated, I think that it goes to the water directly.
There's initially there was some concrete stairs that went down to the water's edge.
So you could walk down the right of way and you'd get to the water.
Correct, correct. It has
And,
access to the water.
and there's probably no provisions for parking or anything like that on the right of way, I would guess, but
No, I mean, people.
it's
walk
a-
down- I mean,
it's a walking type right of way, or
Yeah, it's a right of way for people to access the water. That's all. I mean.
I understand.
nobody Drives down there. I mean, it's just,
yeah, I understand. Okay.
and it's for the people that live in that immediate area.
The right of way is designated for local people, or is
Just
it?
for people on Dunphy Road, there's about 5.
All right, so it's not a public right of way?
No.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's just, it's a.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
It's owned by Joy Dunphy.
Further questions of the applicant? Yes, Ms. Wall.
I have a couple of questions, or I guess one question for Amy regarding the plan. So the plan that went out to public notice is incorrect.
Yes, if you look in the staff report, page 3, section B, proposed project number 4, a couple of minor errors. The distance beyond mean low water is measured incorrectly. We require that measurement to be measured directly along the center line of the facility. It's not measured along the center line. It's still 75 feet beyond mean low water from where they measured it from, so very minor error just to correct it to how we require it. And secondly, the plan appears to actually be at a 1:20 scale rather than the 1:10 scale that's cited on the plan. So we would just request those 2 items be corrected before we issue it. It's non-substantive to the design of the dock or the location of the dock.
When you have a plan that goes out to public notice, it's not accurate.
Yeah.
When you have a plan that goes out to public notice that's not accurate, is there no way to change that plan before it goes out to notice to the abutters during the technical review to have it be accurate?
I believe that this was discovered by Tracy after it had gone out to public notice. We tend to try to get our notices out fairly quickly and before we get too deep into the review process. So that way the 30-day notice is happening while we are reviewing a project. In cases where we find an error that is substantive to the design of the facility, we will renotice it with a correction. Because these 2 were so minor. Like they showed the dock in the wrong location, or they showed that it's 75 beyond mean low, but it's actually 85 beyond mean low. Like it affects the actual request, then we will get that corrected and we will renotice it because the proposal is affected by the errors. In this case, the proposal is not affected by these errors. They measured in the wrong place, but the measurement is the same regardless, between those 2 measurements. And there was an error on what they cited as the scale to be, and the scale is reduced when we send them out to notice anyway. So we opted in that case not to renotice it. They were very minor.
So the plan note regarding the scale is not the same as the actual plan scale.
Correct. Correct. When we got into the review, we sat down with the plans and our scale ruler didn't match. It's actually a 1:20 scale.
But all the written dimensions are correct.
Correct.
So does it affect, in your judgment, the actual location of this dock relative to this place on this plan?
Correct. When we sat down with the plan and we were looking at the measurements in ground truthing it out on the site, it worked out that it was a 1:20 scale instead of a 1:10. It's all 2 scale. It just had the wrong little note on the.
And the center line measurement doesn't change its location out on the site in any way.
It does not.
Thank you.
Other questions? Anything else from the applicant right now? All right, why don't we hear from the objector, and then if we need to, we'll call you back up. Pick it. And even if it's not sworn yet. Okay. You can come forward, sir. Madam. No, I don't know.
I think this is gonna work.
Good evening.
Will you both be testifying?
No, I will be testifying.
Please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help
I
you
do.
God. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
John Robert Wahlberg, John Robert Wahlberg.
Please proceed, sir. Go ahead.
Should I begin? Thank you very much for seeing us. This is my mother, Jean Wahlberg. I'll be speaking on her behalf tonight. Back in midwinter, we received notification that there was a pending application for a boating facility next to our property. We own the abutting adjacent property, and the property is located in a cove in Snug Harbor, just north of High Point, if anybody knows that location. The cove is a residential community that has existed in its present format for many, many, many years. We have lived there since the early 1960s. There are two docks in this cove. One is, we'll call the South Dock. The other one is called the North Dock, we'll call it. And the North Dock is the dock that's owned by our family. When we received the application and looked at the application, the first thing that came to mind for me was the scope and nature of the proposed facility and how it would affect the character and the nature of the community. When you look at, and I don't know if people have seen the short summary that I put together, but there are some pictures and figures in there. When you look at it, what you can see there is that the Phillip property is approximately, we'll say 4 feet, I did not measure it, approximately 4 feet higher than the Wahlberg property next door. The Wahlberg property and the southernmost dock have a direct walkout onto the dock from the property, from the yard, out onto the water. And those docks sit in what I'll call, or have a height of what I'll call a conventional standing off of the water. Because we have, in this case, a property that has a elevation which is maybe 4 feet higher than the two adjacent facilities, properties, what they've proposed is to have a walkout from the yard of that property, which extends out, which would make the dock substantially, significantly higher, more prominent, larger, and more noticeable to anybody looking at the community from the water. Anybody that is in the community would see that this dock stands out much, much more than the North Dock and the South Dock. I bring that to your attention only because, in my opinion, it is non-conventional. It has handrails and guardrails on it. It's large enough to, I guess, require that type of safety apparatus. It is a fairly large and prominent structure that frankly doesn't necessarily have to be that way, and I could maybe explain a little bit later. So when we look at that facility, we see a facility that goes out substantially higher than the rest of the docks, than the other two adjacent docks. It has about a 20-foot ramp, and then it has a 20-foot float at the end, which extends straight out. And that extends straight out past the line, which would connect the terminus of the other two docks. Now, that's important in my discussion. The other two, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but it's important for you to get the flavor here. This is a unique situation for access from the water and for navigation around this particular little area of the pond. There is a large, long sandbar that extends essentially from High Point to Beef Island. That sandbar at medium to low tide is impassable. So there's a short gut on the south end and a short gut on the north end, which allows a boater to be able to avail access to the west side of the sandbar only through these short entrances, these very narrow entrances. When somebody is trying to navigate their small boat from High Point to the northern dock, what they have to do is they have to carefully go in shallow water, and they have to go to the southern dock, and then just at the southern dock, they take a right and they would proceed to the northern dock. The navigable water at low tide is extremely shallow, and it's an extremely narrow channel. The access via that channel, right, is virtually impassable at low tide. And of course, as the tide rises and as there's more water, it's much, much more accessible. The observation that can be made here by looking at the proposal is that you see that they're trying to avail themselves of the deeper water in that channel by extending the float past the terminus, past the line, which connects the terminus of the two docks. So for all intents and purposes, what this variance would do and what the float extending into the variance area would do would be to cut off the navigation channel between the south dock and the north dock. Conventional wisdom would say, well, the further you go out, the deeper the water gets. And that's true until you get to that little channel, okay, that we've all used, all the neighbors and all the children and everybody with small boats have used forever. The problem is that once you get past that, the sandbar becomes the prominent feature and the water gets more shallow. So if we just think, well, it would be easy enough just to go around this dock, not really. Because at low tide and low tide conditions only, there is no water there. It's inches deep. Now, I say inches. I'm going to say at low tide, it's 12 inches deep. Now, I've seen the staff report, and I see that the staff report saw that the 18-inch rule was satisfied. I don't mean to try to overrule or try to disagree with anything that an engineering company has done. I can tell you, I'm a 60-year resident of that area. And at low tide, we don't have 18 inches for the entire footprint of the float. I honestly don't believe that a full 18 inches for that footprint exists, right? Now, I wonder, and it's only speculation on my part, I wonder whether, when the survey was done, whether it was done at low tide, because that's the key here. The key is not navigation during high tide periods. You can drive your boat right over the sandbar. That's not a problem. But this is a unique situation where we as a community have suffered with this shallow water forever. We just live with it. To, as it could appear, to try to avail the deep water so that an individual or a single family can put their boats in the deeper water might be a good idea, but it'll cut off, and we were talking about right away by the road, it'll cut off the right of way by the waterway as well. So my objections are twofold. Number one, the dock would be contrary to the general architectural and character style of the Cove community. I don't know if that's a red book requirement or not. I don't know whether that really matters. But in general, it is different and larger and more prominent and would stick out in our community. Secondly, the placement of the float past the line that connects the end of the two docks would cause a hardship for those people that needed to pass past where that dock is extending. I think I probably in that many words stated as well as I can.
Any questions? Mr. Wahlberg?
Just the, you mentioned the couple of things, but the right of way, you indicated that would be impacted.
I think there may be some confusion about the difference between what I'm speaking about and what the application was speaking about. The right of way that she was speaking about earlier had to do with the right of way from the road to the shore, right? That was neighbors that live to the west on Dunphy Road.
All right.
What I'm talking about is navigation inside the pond.
Right. Okay.
And the fact that this terminal float would obstruct navigation past because of a very narrow channel of water.
On the water itself, not
The water itself.
understand that.
Yes.
You had a reasonable question in here that we occasionally discuss here, and I might be interested in getting a indication of what your riparian rights are to the point Judith Pond. You mentioned that in some of the documents I've read that apparently the riparian rights. What do we do with riparian rights? Are we bound in the state of Rhode Island? I know we discuss this all the time when we have a certain something and lines start to cross. What is the general consensus on what a riparian right is in that condition?
Well, the riparian rights that are being discussed here. And by the way, that right of way, that's a riparian right too. Typically, a riparian right follows the line of the property line.
Yes.
And that goes out.
Yes.
So it would be the riparian line for the applicant. Then it would be the riparian line for the right of way. And on the other side of the right of way would be the riparian line going out. I don't know if I saw an intersection of that here. I might be missing something.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, I did defer to staff on that, but that's typically what happens. When it's a curvature and, the lot lines, we had the very wet case on that.
Yeah.
It can get a little sticky.
Right. That satisfies me, I think. We didn't see any problem with riparian rights, did we?
No, again, in this case, all of the property line extensions
Yes,
extend straight out.
Fine. Okay, thanks.
Ms. Hall?
I have a question regarding the navigation channel, as you understand it, since you've been there for 60 years, relative to this sandbar. When you state that this floating, the terminus, we're talking about the extension of the dock, the floating dock at the very end of the ramp, how that is going to interfere with your navigation. And you said you can't because it would cut off your ability to access this north dock, which is your family's dock. Is that because based on what you said, it sounds like it's because of the sandbar and that's during periods of low tide, correct? There is no way to go around north of your dock and enter your dock from the north side, as opposed to coming across where that floating dock would be.
The sandbar is, I'll have to only guess, quarter of a mile long. I'm only guessing. Beef Island, however far away that is from our property, and High Point is here, right? Our property is basically in the cove adjacent to a High Point. So the customary means of entrance from anywhere down south is to go through the High Point to the southern dock to the northern dock. Is there a way to do it? Maybe, but it's not customary. It's not the way boaters do it. And I can only say that because that is the standard common practice.
Is that because of draft? Is that because of the water depth, that's where the navigation channel is? Is it an actual navigation channel, or is it just like a customary route because of draft?
It is a customary route because of draft, and that's what makes it difficult. It's not a marked channel. It's something that the residents know about.
But it's customary because if you don't go that way, you hit bottom.
Exactly,
So it's more than custom, it's practical.
exactly.
So in other words, you would have to come around that peninsula and go past your dock, potentially, and come back around, I guess, from the north.
The water in the entire pond is very shallow. We might be able to find a way, but as a matter of practicality, there is a customary channel from High Point to the northern dock that we would prefer, we would request kept open, kept the way it is. Putting a float out into this channel would only serve to complicate whatever we're doing, right? We are residents, have been for 60 years. This is the way we've done it for 60 years. And it seems to be a matter of convenience for the application rather than a matter of practicality. I don't know, I truly do not know whether the application considered that, because this is unique to this neighborhood, to this community. And it may be that the application didn't consider it at all. The fact that it's the one and only way in and out at low tide.
So is it your opinion that since it's the one and only way in or out, that it's just the floating part of the dock that significantly impairs your access to your dock?
Yes. Yes, it's the portion of the floating dock. There are two things to consider here. It's the portion of the floating dock that extends past the line that connects the end of the other two docks. And the fact of the matter is, it's very shallow water there. I'm not going to try to judge the engineering report that was done, but I've been there a long time and I've ruined a lot of propellers. I can tell you that the water is very, very shallow there. And I can't believe that there is a blanket statement that says there is always 18 inches of water under the entire footprint of that float. My opinion.
Do we know if the survey was done at high tide or low tide?
I do not know that, and I don't believe that CRMC's requirement is that there's 18 inches of water at all times. We measure our docks from mean high water. Rich, maybe you can clarify, but I believe it's 18 inches at high tide, not at all times.
Well, they go from 18 inches is the standard, and that's based on mean low water. What they did here is they they took a benchmark, a set benchmark, and they transferred it out, and they were able to get the depth measurements from a set benchmark from one of the USGS marks probably, and they pulled it out, and the engineer went and surveyed it. So that's how they get the water depth.
There's no question that you can get 18 inches sometime.
Right, but when there's I would agree, if there's a lower tide, a moon tide, you're not gonna have 18 inches. But our stand, at a lower tide, let's say like a moon tide, you will have lower than 18 inches, less than 18 inches of water. But our standard is 18 inches as the standard for water depth,
At mean low.
at mean low water.
So relative to this channel from this point, based on water depth, is that channel, the description of the channel as described here, does that comport with your understanding of this?
What I see here is, what I see is there's 18 inches of water at the end of the flow. I'm not sure how wide that channel is. That's not shown. I mean, I could look at the contours and it looks like there's water between I would say at the end of the float and at the end of the fixed pier. It's also a smaller flow. It's a standard flow. It's 150 square feet. So they actually made a smaller flow of 126 square feet.
Do you know why it extends so much further out past the other boundaries?
They're trying to reach 18 inches water, what they're trying to do.
The shoreline bumps out as well. You can see.
Yeah, I see a little bit of.
The shoreline changes as well.
Correct.
I don't know the status of the two other docks. There is, in the objection, there's an assertion that they've been there for 60 years. So I would make an assumption that those docks likely were approved during our grandfather dock period, where anything and everything was approved if you demonstrated it pre-existed CRMC. They are very likely not built to our standards because they're too old.
I have a question for staff.
Mr. Gomez.
If in fact this is a sandbar that we are talking about, do they historically move? I mean, sandbars typically change shapes and storms, and the channels sometimes fill in and things like that. Is this really a sandbar we're talking about that over time evolves, I guess? I mean,
Yes, it probably does evolve.
Yeah.
However, this area of Point Judith Pond is not a very high energy area, so it's probably not changing dramatically.
because you don't have the water flow and the storms don't
Correct.
create big waves.
This is down in
and
the
things like
southwest
that.
corner of the pond. It's not a high energy.
So it's probably been like this for 60 years, I guess is.
In some iteration, it probably hasn't. It probably does change to some extent, but
Yeah.
not as dramatically as you would see in the open waters. of the Bay
And
Area.
just one other quick question while I'm talking. There was a lot of discussion in what I read about the impact to shellfish and increases in oysters and mussels going away and things like that. But relative to this plan, there's no impact to any shellfish that we know of.
I wouldn't expect a significant impact. Typically, the way a dock is constructed is,
Yeah.
especially if it's by barge, the
Yeah,
pile
yeah.
driver comes in and drives.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about that phase at
That's
all.
it.
I mean, there's no reason that when this dock is completed, it has any impact on the existing shellfish or whatever may be native to that area. I'm just going through some of the complaint and.
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
For a dock in shallow water like this, when there is a float at 18-inch water depth, we require float stops If they're not already in the details, we require
I
them.
mean,
So that way the-
to me, there shouldn't be any impact on mussels or,
Correct.
in
The
fact, you
float,
might grow a few on the
the
pilings.
float will not touch the bottom. We
Yeah,
put float
yeah.
stops in, so it will not set upon the bottom.
Does the float stay all winter or does it come out? The float, is that
It's not identified as a seasonal float,
okay,
so it
okay,
it is expected to stay in. There's no, there was a SAV survey done. There's no SAV out there, so I wouldn't expect a significant impact to
all right.
shellfish or fin.
And you did reduce the size of the float, you said.
Correct.
Good.
They did.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Wahlberg? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I've got neighbors. I've got 28 years in guns.
Yeah. Pull the applicant back up at this point. Allow you an opportunity to address the objections that were presented.
Yeah, so in all due respect of our neighbors, couple things about this waterway. And he may be living there for 60 years, and I've been boating for 60. Not always on the ocean, but I'm very familiar with waterways. I'm very familiar with boating. I'm very familiar with docks. And we've been living there since 2017. And I've used this waterway with a small 15-foot boat that I have with our grandchildren and immediate family members. I know the way in, and I know there's a way out to the north. And the way out to the north is actually easier. The way in from the south is not so easy, and in any low tide, even my 15-foot whaler with the engine lifted, I scrape, and that's a 15-foot boat. So, and the width of the waterway in front of where our dock would end is dramatically, large enough to navigate any size boat that's going to make that waterway. I've used that waterway for tubing, water skiing, okay, obviously at mid to high tide. Otherwise you can't. And you can get out to the north side. As far as the dock that we have drawn up, our neighbors, if you look 2 doors to the north of him, they have the same exact design. I don't know the size. It's the same dock in the same area. So we do use that waterway. There is another way to that waterway from the north, if need be, but I wouldn't even see the necessary need to do that. I can turn a water skier in front of my house in that waterway, and I've done it many times. Obviously not when there's people clamming out there and not at low tide. So anybody that lives in that area has to be very aware of the depth and what's going on around them. And I think any boater would have that, it's in plain sight. And you're right, the sandbar is there. And since we've been living there, it hasn't moved. We went through a hurricane with an east wind right in our face. It didn't budge that sandbar at all. And I was there. So I understand his concerns. We're going to use this for family and for recreation. And that waterway, if we go closer with our dock, we won't have, it'll be worse for probably under the dock, as far as I'm concerned, even with floats or stops, not floats, sorry. But I am familiar with the waterway. There is a way out to the north of that waterway, and boats take it. 2 doors down north of him, those boaters don't come in front of our house. They come in from the north. They don't come in from High Point. I've been there since 2017. I haven't seen them come in that way once, and they have boats. So, look, we're in, I think, our rights of our request. We are very family and boating oriented people. We want to use this for recreation. And, that's our request. I don't know. Kathy.
And it's not a T-dock, it's very simple.
Oh, yeah,
design.
and also sorry. Interrupt you. The dock to our south, by the way, actually has 5 tie-up poles, 2 of which are east of their T-dock, at least 12 to 15 feet off their dock. So that dock extends further out. They use it to tie boats off. They'll put anywhere up to 5 boats around that dock. And they have 5 tie-up poles. Now granted, I'm not here to, I'm talking about my dock, but our request. But yeah, and to think that if our float goes where it's designed to go, that it's gonna limit traffic even from the south to our neighbor to the north dock is wrong. It's false.
Ms. Izzy, question?
Mr. Phillips, do you know how far the sandbar would be from, let me finish my question. Let me finish my question, Mr. Phillips. Do you know how far the sandbar will be from the end of your floating dock?
I haven't measured it. If I had to guess, I'd say at least 30, 40 feet. I can turn a boat in within that period, in that size.
Okay, so there'd be 30 or 40 feet of channel.
It's not really, it's not a marked channel.
Well, no, we're using that
It's
term
deep
loosely.
water.
Yeah, deeper water.
I mean, compared to,
Right.
it's the deepest part of the area.
Yeah. What is the depth?
I was just going to ask, if you're finished, the amount of and size of watercraft that you see off your area.
Yeah. Our neighbor to the south has an 18-foot Key West that he uses quite frequently to fish and stuff.
And goes through that waterway or
He
not?
goes through the southern waterway towards by High Point.
And you have a 15 and
I have a 15-foot weather that I don't have at
that's well,
home
good.
now because there's no.
Yeah, that's the flat part.
But that's what we typically use on the pond.
And not a lot of activity or a lot of activity.
This is it right now, at least it's a summer home for us. So we spend a couple weeks during summer and almost every weekend.
I'm not asking how much you would use it. I'm just
No,
asking
I-
your observation.
I can go a whole weekend, not see a boat out there.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
And more.
Yeah.
There will people come up to and sit on the sandbar and clam. But minimal activity, this is not the main channel where there's activity all day long.
Yeah.
But in this channel, I can go a whole weekend and not see a kayak, never mind, a boat,
Thank you.
unless it's our kayaks.
Any other questions of, yes, Ms. Wall?
I'm not really understanding why it has to be this long. I
Why what?
understand you're trying to get to
18
deeper
inches of
water.
water, I think.
I'm understanding that you want to get to deeper water. But it seems that you're also testifying that these other docks on the north and the south of you have adequate access to the water in the same generalized conditions. The sandbar is the same sandbar. I'm not 100% clear as to why it needs to be this long with that floating terminus. Why you need a variance. Just to the point of the standard for a variance, I'm not clear on why you need it.
Yeah, if I may, so in type 2 waters, obviously our client wants to permit a dock for recreational use, which is permittable. The request for the variance is simply to meet the Red Book standards and obtain 18 inches at mean low. And again, to answer some of the questions before, that is a mean observation of low tide in the datum to reach exactly 18 inches, honestly, maybe 20. The dock had to be 75 feet long. The plans will clearly show that at 50 feet, we're under the 18-inch minimum requirement.
What exactly are you at 50 feet?
I can take a brief look and answer that for you. I would say at 50 feet, you are at about 13 inches of depth at mean low tide. if that's accurate to the board.
And you earlier said that we don't require 18 feet.
We do require 18 inches. That's the
18
minimum
inches,
water depth.
Excuse me, the minimum for a recreational dock,
Correct,
18 inches of water at the terminus.
correct.
For climate change. Water. Years.
And do you concur that there's only 13 inches at the 50-foot mark?
Yeah, I think that's about accurate. Because the float's 20 feet. 21 feet, so you take off 21 minus 75, it's at 54. So, yeah. Pretty close. I mean, it's within an inch or two.
I think that we shouldn't lose sight of that, where the variance that we're seeking is 25 feet. You know, what are these tiles, 2 feet? You know, the width of this room or something, so. Maybe we're not talking a big addition here when we're talking about the salt pond. So,
The only thing I'll add to finish this is our design was conservative as previously stated, and we wouldn't be asking for a variance if we didn't need to here. The side setbacks are met, which helps the recreational use argument. So I have to cap this.
and without the need for this variance, this would have been, well, you had an objector, so it would have to come here anyway. Got it.
Any further questions? No, all right. Where else? Procedurally, where do we stand?
No, if you want me to repeat what I said to the last application, I will. In regard to a substantive objection. The application has been presented in full. I think the objection has been presented in full too. So, if the board wants to make a determination as to whether or not the objection is substantive, which would send the application to a hearing officer, I think that needs to be made, and if necessary, if you want to go through the standards again.
And if we make a decision that it's not substantive, similar to the last one, then we can vote on it.
Correct, yes.
I think the only issue would have been the recreational part of the list that you presented. That may or may not be substantial or substantive.
That would have to be a finding made.
And that was the reason I asked about the amount of recreation and the rights of ways and how many people get there and things, and it seems very, very minimal. And I don't know how the climbers get there, but you know, they do show up with their own boats, I'm sure. But, you know, the recreational aspects were on the list, and to me, it's very minimal.
All right, so our first decision or vote will be on the issue of whether or not the objection is a substantive objection.
Correct.
Okay, what's the council's pleasure? Mr. Gomez?
Based on the discussions, the staff report, findings of fact, and the fact that I think the only issue would be the recreational issue, and I feel that that's minimal. I would move that this is not a substantive. What do I want to say?
Objection.
Yes. Objection.
Motion has been made by Mr. Gomez. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Izzy has seconded it. Any discussion? Hearing none on the vote on the substantive objection motion. I'll poll the council. Mr. Izzy.
Aye.
Mr. Gomez.
Aye.
Mr. Russolino. Ms. Hall.
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon.
Aye.
Ms. Reynolds.
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye. Next is a vote on the application itself. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, based on the testimony that was received at tonight's hearing based on the staff report. I would move that the council approve the 25-foot variance for the floating dock as contained in the application. I would make the motion subject to all the standard stipulations by the staff as well as
Logically.
making a stipulation that all construction be via barge mounted equipment only, and no work shall occur on or directly seaward of the abutting right of way. And that the application, the plans that are attached to the application be corrected to the satisfaction of staff.
There a second?
I would second that. That includes the corrections can be handled by staff administratively. It doesn't need to come back as a
Correct.
Yes. Sorry, second.
All right, motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Izzy,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez,
Aye.
Mr. Russolino.
Aye.
Ms. Hall.
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon. Ms. Reynolds.
Aye.
I too vote aye. The application has been approved. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Still the one of the plants. Haven't found out.
We have one more.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what happened. So let me there is no what happened. Oh,
That'd be good.
so the doctor appears.
I said, remind you, we have a meeting tonight, and I didn't hear from them.
Has anyone entered as it relates to Interstate Navigation Company?
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can answer that. Checking my email during the meeting, apologies. I received an email from the engineer for Interstate that there was a miscommunication with his client, and this client was not able to attend the meeting tonight. So technically, that would be strike one, I guess. But they would more than be happy to reschedule and bring the matter at another date.
Do we need to take a vote on continuing that matter? Or
Yes.
just,
What?
we should, right?
Move that we continue the
For Mr.
Interstate Navigation Company.
One sec, Steve.
Do you have to have the applicant here? And there's no objectors. I know that. And
Yes.
is
Yeah, I
that
wouldn't recommend that the matter be heard without the applicant here.
okay? But I asked.
Thank you. Ms. Izzy, to continue.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we continue the application of Interstate Navigation Company, application 2023-3-092 to the next available date.
There a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Izzy.
Aye.
Mr. Gomez.
Aye.
Mr. Russolino. Ms. Hall.
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon. Ms. Reynolds.
Aye.
I too vote aye. So that particular matter will be continued to the next available date. Which leaves us with our final matter, Cedarhurst Condominium Association. 2022-12-072. Cindy, you good to keep going on?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a buffer zone management consisting of removal of invasive vines and planting with native shrubs located at plat 141 lot 2, 132 Fishing Cove Road, North Kingston, Rhode Island. Is the applicant present?
Yes.
All right, kindly come forward, please. They were all here.
Could you please raise your right hands? You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and spell them for the record.
David Bashaw, DAVID BASHAW.
is here from Applied Biosystems, and it's LINDASTEERE.
Which? Go to swear them in case they, if that's the
I
one.
just did.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Amy, you have this one, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you noted, this is an application requesting buffer zone management at the Cedarhurst condominiums. The condominiums are located on type 2 waters, adjacent to a coastal wetland that is located on an inlet in the north part of Wickford Harbor. This site has several CRMC assets, which were done as part of the development of the condos, as well as one or two previous buffer zone management assets. The application before us tonight is for some additional buffer zone management specific to removing invasive honeysuckle vines in selected locations, and the removed vines would be replanted with native shrubs. This application did not require public notice. It was not sent to notice. However, members of the condo association didn't object to the application as they knew that it was before the CRMC. The summary of the objections are the objectors are concerned that the work is not extensive enough and does not treat vines within their viewshed, as well as the work not being extensive enough and it will lead to failure of the project. All of the invasive vines within the entire buffer zone are not being treated. Upon receipt of the objections, staff reached out to the Cedarhurst Condo Homeowners Association and asked them to provide their meeting minutes and documentation that the project was appropriately discussed and voted on within the Homeowners Association. They did that. They provided that documentation that it was appropriately voted on. And they went on to further state that this request was primarily limited by funding and that they are selecting the areas with the assistance of a certified invasives manager that are best ensuring success at this time, and that additional vine removal may be requested in the future as their vote and their funding allows. Staff would note that we do not ever authorize management of 100% of a buffer zone at any given time. The maximum that can be managed with the oversight of an invasive manager is 50% the area of a buffer. This request, however, is less than 50%, which will not require the invasive manager to be on site during the coursework. They did hire, during the site work. They did hire the invasive manager to at least help them determine the areas that they should work. It is the opinion of reviewing staff that the objection is not a red book matter. The objection is a homeowners association concern. The application would have been reviewed and approved administratively, if not for the objections. Late last week, some of the objectors did withdraw their application. I don't believe it made it into the packet because it came in late. However, upon going through the file, not all of the objections were withdrawn. So because there is at least one or two still remaining, it is still before you with those same concerns.
Is the gist of the objections that they want the same work done in front of their condo that they're doing at the other one? It seems like they're doing some work here, but because of monetary concerns, the vote was, let's take care of this, but not here yet. And then these people want all of it done.
Correct. The concerns were two-part. They're not doing it in one location. They're doing several locations within the buffer, but they were selectively chosen. It's not the entire buffer. There is still some invasive vines located within the buffer. So some of the concern was they are not doing the area near us. And then some of the concern was if you're not taking all of it out, you're doomed to failure because there's other stuff located nearby, which was why we pointed out that we never let anybody treat 100% of their buffer zone area. You are only allowed to do up to 50% because we do not want to impact the functions and values of the buffer zone in its entirety in one fell swoop.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I just want to, so the areas that are going to be clear, I just want to verify, were determined by the certified invasives manager, not by members of the conduct.
Correct. And they were identified in the field. The vines were flagged. The reviewing staff, Peter O'Rourke, visited the site, saw the areas that have been chosen for treatment right now and supports those.
And can you just clarify again, you said it was the objections, the content and substance of the objections were outside of the red book. Is that your way of saying that it's outside of your jurisdiction? It's not relevant to any of the standards that you review as part of an application?
For the most part, yes. The only one that would be relevant to the red book would be treating the entire buffer zone and leaving some invasives within the buffer. We don't ever let anyone treat 100% of their buffer.
Right,
So
right, you said that.
while they did bring that up as a concern, it's not something we allow anyway.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just this invasive species, is it close to the buildings or is it a ways away or what are we talking about? It's scattered around. I mean, is it a barrier thing or what?
I'm sorry?
A barrier to the, some plantings along the waterfront?
I don't believe it's a barrier, but it's a vine. So
Yeah, well, honeysuckle and, all of that stuff.
right, it can grow and it can choke out other
Absolutely.
species that are growing. So what the homeowners association did with the assistance of the invasives manager was choose the locations that are the worst. So some are somewhat close to the buildings,
You
some are
actually went
deep.
out and did 144 flags or something like that.
Peter O'Rourke did. This is Peter's review, but yes, he went out and he went through the buffer zone and he located, if not every single one of them, the vast majority of
And
them.
you have other vegetation remains that may be native vegetation?
Correct. The only thing in this application that is proposed to be removed is the vines
And they choke out the native material.
and native species of shrubs will be planted upon removal of those.
Sure, that's good.
They're trading it out with that.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you. Questions of Amy? You want to give us an explanation of what we're doing?
Do you like to do that one?
What the Cedarhurst condo group did is decide they were going to do invasive work. They had a certain amount of money for this phase, and we looked at the entire shoreline of Cedarhurst. We selected out about 25% of the total in their buffers and view corridors and marked those shrubs that would consist to be about 25% of the total buffer and view corridor. So that every unit that had invasive material seaward of it in the view corridor was marked 25% of it. So every unit that had invasives had some amount that came to about 25% that will be removed, the roots dug out, and a native plant, a native shrub planted in its place. So there'll still be the same number of shrubs, and the invasives being removed are actually shrubs, but they tend to take over versus some of the native plant. So
What was the criteria used to decide which ones were chosen?
we started on the inner side closest to the units, and we marked the first, probably varied between 25 feet to possibly 40 feet from the inner side and then towards the cove to figure out 25% of the invasive plant. So honeysuckle is a shrub. It's easily identified. And I flagged every single one of them that's going to be removed. Yeah. So I believe the people who objected just tended to have a wider swath of honeysuckle in front of their unit. And they're not going to be able to get all of them removed because every unit in both phases of Cedarhurst are getting a small amount of those removed that amounts to 25% of the total.
Is the determinative factor the cost?
Yes, they had a certain amount of money. They wanted to use it for this particular phase of the project and hope once they do the first phase successfully, they'll come back to the council for phase 2 and could do perhaps another 50% of the buffer.
Questions from the council?
Just have are we
Yes.
looking at both phase 1 and phase 2 now, or just phase 1?
Well, there's 2 phases to the condo project. But this is the first phase of the invasive management project.
Okay.
These are the development. Excuse me, we're looking at the photo in the application where phase 2 is the build out of the units,
Yes,
condominium units versus phase 1. And phase 1 of the invasive removal is different than what's being shown here as phase 1 and phase 2.
yes, the phase 1 of the invasive removal includes both phase 1 and 2 of the condo project.
That witness? Sure, would you like to add anything?
No, I think Linda hit the nail right on the head.
Okay. Anyone else present this evening to speak in favor of this application?
We are all in favor of this application. If necessary, we can speak.
Okay, you just,
Yeah, you're gonna have to come up and we gotta swear you in.
well, we're not gonna ask, but just so she can identify who she is, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If the council notices.
You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Carol Burnham, CNROL. He has been Peter, you are the Robert, he has been John, you and the Mary.
Thank
I am president of the Cedarhurst Association. There are other board members. The association has something called the coastal committee. It's for landscaping and also the buffer zone in our waterfront areas. Mr. Ritchie is co-chair of that. We hired Linda back in, I guess, December of 2021 to help us in what had become an increasingly invasive, rich buffer area. When I first moved in 12 years ago, there were a lot of deer there, and you could see the fogs. There was a lot. You don't see that as much anymore. It doesn't mean they're not out there, but they're hidden. It's also taken away some of the native berries that were there. There was some blueberry out there that isn't there anymore. The honeysuckles are basically taken over. They are invasive, and that's what they've done. They've invaded. The board has looked at the finances. This is not a problem that has occurred over the last 1, 2, 3 years. This has been happening since probably 2000. But this board acted upon it. The money, we have $10,000 that was, according to our governing documents, the highest amount of money we can spend on a project in a single year without getting all owners to vote on that project. If you've ever tried to get 132 people to vote on something, you know it's herding cats. It's very difficult to happen. So the 10,000 was per the governing documents, and quite frankly, it's also per our budget. It's coming out of our one of our reserve accounts that is paid into by all 132
owners. Because of that, the board had made a commitment to owners that we would, over a multi-year project, incrementally improve all view corridors, at the same time restoring the buffer, restoring the natural habitat, which should help with the wildlife and all of that. So that's what has happened. Somebody mentioned it as to in front of somebody's house, they didn't like it. It was actually a cross-hatched area as far as the map, I believe that you were just looking at. Those cross-hatched areas in the ascent were to be left undisturbed. When Linda marked invasives, there were none marked within the cross-hatched areas. At some point in time, we will come back as a phase 2 or a phase 3 and request that, because there's no question about it. An invasive is going to spread into areas where there aren't invasives. So at some point in time, we will come back with that. That's what this project is all about, basically.
Are you speaking on behalf of the board members that are here?
I am, well, do you want me to? They're both shaking their heads, so yes, I am.
Yes, he has said nothing to which I will object.
Ms. Izzy.
Just have one question. The condominium association, is that incorporated? Are you a corporation or are you an unincorporated?
Unincorporated.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else to speak in opposition? You're in favor of it, right? Okay. No one to speak in opposition, okay. Any questions of the board, of the council? Is there a motion, from the council?
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that the council find that the objections to the application are not substantive and probably don't meet the standards of an objection, or that they don't meet the standards for a substantive objection under the rules and regulations of the CRMC.
Is there a second? Motion made and seconded, any discussion? Mr. Izzy?
Aye.
Mr. Gomez?
Aye.
Mr. Russolino? Ms. Fall?
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon?
Aye.
Ms. Reynolds?
Aye.
I too vote aye. Is there a motion on the application?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the application of Cedar First Condominium Association to do its landscaping based on the report of the staff, the testimony that was received tonight, and the standards of the Red Book.
Motion made by Mr. Izzy. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Gomez. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Izzy.
Aye.
Mr. Gomez.
Aye.
Mr. Russolino. Ms. Hall. Mr. Gagnon. Ms. Reynolds.
Aye.
I too vote aye. Application has been approved. Nothing further to come before the council. I entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
Let's see.